So the Reserve Bank has revised down its growth forecast for the country, with economic growth now expected to reach 1.9% from 2% this year. Yesterday, the bank announced a 75 basis point repo rate increase, bringing the repo rate to 6.25%, up from the 5.5% announced in July. The Reserve Bank Governor, Lesetja Kganyago, said while the producer price and food prices have eased, the Russia-Ukraine war still has adverse effects on prices globally. Notably, the US Federal Reserve Bank on Wednesday raised the rates by 0.75 percentage points for the third consecutive time this year. Lumkile Mondi from the School of Economics and Finance at Wits University joins us for this discussion. Lumkile, always a pleasure seeing you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Just a correction, it's Lesetja Kganyago, the governor.
Oh my gosh, what did we say? Oh, we said, can you believe it? As I was reading it, I'm reading, you got to understand, when we're reading things, I'm like, yeah. And someone wrote Lesetja Kganyago. There you go, Kaiser, we've promoted you to the Reserve Bank governor. Okay, I'm now embarrassed, and let's leave it there. I'm hoping we don't super him as the Reserve Bank governor. Can you imagine? Listen, jokes aside, let's talk about this. We're in trouble. We're in big trouble. Okay, interest rates, it's a trend. It's happening around the world. But, economies are unique. Things that are different are happening all over the place. But let's look at what our MPC are doing. Obviously, there are those that hail the MPC for keeping a close eye and say that they effectively manage inflation targeting. Others say this will have a negative impact on the country's growth. So let's get your opinion.
So the Reserve Bank and the rest of the central banks across the world have had huge experiences in various crises that we've seen in the world, particularly energy influence and driven crisis, whether it was the 1973 OPEC crisis, the Iran Revolution around 1978, and many others. And the consequences of those crises was enormous to people, because central banks were very close to the state and therefore they didn't do any action. All those economies following those crises went into deep recessions. So therefore, using those lessons that I've learned in the past, the central banks have really learned that the most important thing is to protect the poor by trying to contain prices. And you do that by basically using the interest rate as an instrument to try and curtail demand. In doing so also, trying to ensure that the consequences or outcome of that is lower demand, and therefore prices come back very quickly. And you avoid a crisis whereby the poor, who because of high energy prices and therefore high food prices, are the ones that go on famine and starve because the price of food is no longer affordable and accessible to them. So they're doing this really to protect the lowest income people, those that are very vulnerable to high increase in prices. And we should encourage them to do so. At the same time, we should also look skeptical at politicians who, in fact, this crisis emanates from their actions, and therefore they need to be held accountable. And I don't think we're doing very well in that regard in South Africa and the rest of the world.
The problem is that, okay, so we know now that we're at pre-pandemic levels. I mean, we did see that when COVID hit, we saw 400 basis points just wiped off the interest rates, everything to try and help us. But it feels like things are even now. The tough times are upon us really badly. I mean, yes, of course, businesses stopped, everything stopped during COVID, but it's now trying to build ourselves back up, and we've got every obstacle in our way to stop us from building ourselves back up. I mean, obviously, we saw the Reserve Bank governor saying that the rising cost of living is detrimental to the economy, and hence the Reserve Bank chooses to manage it this way. I mean, do you agree that that is the right way to go? Rates adjustments take place in the context of a poorly performing economy. Could this come with even more job losses and higher credit costs? How do households survive these times?
Absolutely. I think it is the right way that central bank is managing this economy. So in an economy whereby we are being failed by by fiscal policy instrument. That is, the South African government having invested trillions of money into infrastructure and very little to show for it. So in our background, if we had functioning entities of security of supply, whereby small businesses will get more affected than bigger businesses, we're going to continue to thrive, create jobs, make more money, pay taxes, we'll be in a better position. So here, because all of us in South Africa have got experiences of load shedding, of failing and falling infrastructure, the transport, whether it's roads in urban areas, or even water for that matter. So we have that experience. So with that experience, and having failed as South Africans to take action and force politicians to account for these failures, when the Reserve Bank acts this way, then we see and shift the blame towards the central bank, an institution that has functioned independently and effectively, when in fact the majority of failures come from the other side, we do nothing about. So I think many of us have got these biases because of ideological positions, whereby we fail to hold those that were appointed every 5 years to account or vote them out. And therefore, when the central bank, who's trying to assist in a situation whereby the fiscal policy and other instruments have failed because politicians have repurposed state institutions and misused many of these funds which are supposed to go to infrastructure to make sure that small business can function in a lower cost economy, and therefore doing nothing. We seem to be biased towards the central bank. And I think that's where we need to educate more, to understand more, that we've got a voice as South Africans. We have got power to mobilize ourselves and back in collective action to hold politicians to account. If we don't do that, Lesetja Kganyago and his colleagues at the bank will always be a scapegoat for policy failures under the ANC government.
Yeah, I mean, Kganyago did say that if you allow inflation to become entrenched, it becomes a monster that's difficult to manage. And we see this in many, many countries happening right now. Does the Reserve Bank have other instruments as an option? I mean, is this the only option that they have available to them?
Fortunately, the instrument that they have was given by our Act of Parliament. So we basically constitutionally took a view that we're going to create an independent institution. And secondly, we're going to give it a mandate of price stability. So it is a choice that we've given the mandate to. And I think Mr. Kganyago and his colleagues are implementing the crucial choices that South Africans have made. And therefore, we need to respect that. However, those that gave the Reserve Bank that mandate and constitutionally, they are not following their own constitutional responsibility and constitutional mandate. And that's why we come in the end, and various other South Africans, that it is time for us as South Africans to take action and hold those that we've appointed who are not abiding by the crucial mandate to account. And unfortunately, South Africans are not taking action, instead to attack institutions who are following and pursuing the constitutional mandate and doing that exceptionally. So that's where the problem lies. And I think until we reflect as citizens, as individuals, and we start holding those that are supposed to abide by constitution to account, I think we always find scapegoat for failures instead of doing the right thing and locating where failures is, and therefore making and taking responsibility at the voting booth when the elections come to do the right thing.
I want to talk about, the where we are right now, because obviously, yes, interest rates have now gone up to pre-pandemic levels, and we are financially in a tough position. We understand that the world is going through the same thing, but the world isn't necessarily having load shedding. And this is something that, I mean, you yourself now are saying, I mean, you're about to have your electricity taken off from 8 until 12:30. I mean, these are prime working hours. I mean, I was speaking to our analyst yesterday as well, and as we were speaking to him, he showed us how he was lighting himself up for the interview with just a power bank light, saying, this is all I've got and this is how I have to conduct my life. Now, this is not conducive to growing any economy right now. So, you know, when we look at the prospect of where we're at, yes, high interest rates, everything is expensive. The price of things is becoming absolutely, I mean, to get a basket of food these days is just, it's crazy. And then to add to that, we have rolling blackouts where people just can't afford to keep their businesses running. What are we going to do here?
So, I mean, we have made very tough decisions in the past few weeks. The president has announced the importance of the private sector as a partner in generating electricity. What we need to be doing in the end is now to speed up the reforms around the transmission. Just make sure that we allow the new transmission company to be independent and therefore to invest on much more infrastructure that can be able to absorb other forms of energy efficiently and cheaply. And that transmission owner, who is also going to act as a market operator, is able, therefore, to source in cheaper electricity from the new generators that we've allowed in terms of the reforms that the president announced in July. And that's a slower process. So the fact that, you know, the coordination between the presidency and the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy in terms of fast-tracking the restructuring is frustrating. Therefore, what it does is that it's making the elite, those that have got options to generate for themselves, are going to do that. Similarly, the bigger business has made huge announcement around powering itself. Where now we're left with is that basically where jobs are created, where individuals who are creative, who are creating opportunities for themselves by creating jobs as small businesses, those are being basically destroyed. And in the process of that destruction, jobs are being destroyed. So what we're having now, or we're leading to, we're going to have a very biased economy towards big business who are able to power themselves, and also the elite who are able to provide their own alternatives. And basically the general public continuing to suffer, infrastructure continuing to suffer, and deepening the inequality that the ANC government had already inherited through its own policy failures. So I think it's going to get worse for South Africans for quite some time. It can only get better in the medium to long term when South Africans take action against politicians who seem to have no interest at all to fixing the problems. It's been over 15 years, Leanne, with this problem. And there is no plan that's really seriously resolving this. And we do nothing as citizens as well. We all say, I've got no shedding, and we do nothing. As long as we do that, we do nothing. Politicians know, we know our people, they're not going to do anything. Come 2024, they'll vote us in. So it means that our policies are right. It's only the Lumkile Mondis, the elite, who are complaining about our policies. And that's where the problem lies. It lies with the citizen that refuses to act and hold people to account is going to find itself in this position we're finding ourselves. And it's going to deepen if we continue not making the right call in terms of making these politicians to account.
Yeah, I mean, we had comments that came from our Mineral Resources Minister yesterday that really made me sort of sit back and think, you know, are you this out of touch? That was the question that I had to ask myself, and then almost keep quiet and say, okay, just, you know, calm down. I mean, the comment that was made by our minister, he was speaking, and he went on to say that, I'm trying to find the quote here, he says, South Africans see themselves as an island and don't realize that we are in a global crisis when it comes to the energy, and that we need to look to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, let's just go back a few years. This energy crisis did not start, as you yourself have mentioned now. We've been stuck in this for 16 to 18 years. This didn't start now when Russia and Ukraine went into war. Yes, of course, Europe is struggling now at this point in time, and there are countries that have their own issues when it comes to electricity. But this is something we've been warned about. This is something that didn't suddenly come about. It is just worsening by the day. The infrastructure is getting worse. We are only using money to keep those things burning. That's all we're doing. We're burning money to try and keep the lights on. And that is the problem. There is just, it feels like there's no plan.
In fact, ours was a very positive story at the beginning. We are growing just under 6%. We are creating jobs. We are running a budget surplus. We are introducing support programs for the poor. So our economy is flying. And because of this high demand, we find that we have not invested enough on additional capacity. And we start building these new assets. So what I'm saying to you and our viewers is that actually, when we started, we were in a very strong position financially, and we believed, many of us, that, you know what, our crisis was better because it was a crisis driven by a growing economy, an emerging black middle class, the so-called black diamonds, and really a huge expectation for the future of closing the inequality that we inherited. But thereafter, we basically lost the plot because all that stronger position, the change in the ANC and the change in government and the repurposing of state institution, where that inherited wealth suddenly went into people's pockets, went into high cost in various infrastructure builds. Today, we are with a much more smaller infrastructure. We are in a very deep and poor space and a deep crisis, which in fact, Mr. Mantashe, by his admission, suddenly has forgotten that, you know, there was a better crisis around 2007. And this one is worse because it's really an aggregation of policy failures, of mistake, of corruption, and mismanagement under the ANC government, which in fact it should be talking to that, you know what, we have failed. We inherited a good crisis of growth and development. Now where we are, our infrastructure is falling apart. Our generation capacity has almost half than where it was in 2007. And that's where lies the problem. That Mr. Mantashe won't account, the ANC won't account, and as long as we do nothing about it, we're going to go deeper and deeper into crisis.
All right, Lumkile, let's leave it there. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us here on Morning Live and just talking us through tough times, tough road ahead for us. It really, really is. Lumkile Mondi is from the School of Economics and Finance and Wits University, interpreting the implications of the increase in interest rates, what it means for households and, of course, the economy.